Hello, everybody. I think we're live. Welcome to this workshop discussing advertising, online advertising. I would say, in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment, which is, I guess, a very fine way to describe the environment we're in today. So I'm Charles Henry. I'm a VP Ads Product at Criteo. I'm very, very excited to be with you all today and discuss really like what is happening to our online advertising business, either from a regulatory standpoint or technological standpoint, and more importantly, how should we equip ourselves and how should we anticipate what's ahead to really navigate successfully on behalf of our clients and our partners these environments that we are in that is very much ever-changing. I'm super excited to be joined by a great panel we have today with us, with JB Rouet from Publicis, Gaël Demesson from Prisma, Thibaut from Data, and I have the pleasure to have Alex from the Tech Lab, who will give us some really interesting updates about how Tech Lab is really developing cross-channel standards for addressability and accountability to address some of the problems or some of the situations that we are to be able to handle in the future if we are to be successful. So without further ado, I would be happy to start giving a first elements of context. I don't know if the presentation is on yet. I don't have a feedback on the presentation yet, but here it comes. Thank you very much. So maybe on the next slide, yeah, a few first elements of the context definitely that we have to be adapted to is really the regulatory context. So here in France and in Europe, we are all very much familiar with both the e-privacy directive and its revision that is ongoing right now, as well as the GDPR regulations and the various interpretations that exist on how to collect consent properly in the various jurisdictions, interpreted by the various DPAs, some of which I have put below on the left-hand side. But this was mostly a European game, I would say, or a European effort for quite some time. But now what we realize and what we assess and what we witness is that it's becoming a global endeavor in trying to regulate or getting more clearer rules of the games for data management and privacy protection for users, either in Brazil with the LGPD, in the United Arab Emirates, in California, and you might have seen the CPRA ballot that has been cast a couple of weeks ago. So this is what was really a European, I would say, topic first. These regulations and these evolution of the regulations around user data management now is really becoming something truly global. So that's one part of the equation that we have to navigate is how do we make sure our solutions and our services are really adapted to the regulatory context that is evolving rather fast everywhere in the world. But that's only one side of the topic, because the other side on the next slide is really around the technological landscape that is evolving fast as well. On this timeline, what we see is that I've put the browser's evolutions with regards to tracking mechanisms or cookie lifetime value management, I would say. And what we can see with a glimpse is that it's been for quite some time really a Safari story with updates coming quite regularly, and maybe every 6 months or so. But starting end of 2019, end of last year, it's really become again something that's been more widespread as an effort, meaning trying to come up with policies or practices that encompass or that restrict how tracking mechanisms work or cookies work, with Mozilla Firefox and Microsoft Edge coming to the party late 2019. And obviously, and something we'll talk definitely at length in this workshop, Google has not been far away and has come out very publicly with the set of 24 initiating proposals that they've called the Privacy Sandbox, which really are about reshuffling the entire technical ecosystem upon which every online advertising mechanism on the web is based. And that calls, again, for us to really adapt the way we function, the way we serve our clients, to make sure that we are still relevant and enable them to reach the outcomes and the users the way they seek to reach them. So that's really the two aspects that make everything the landscape ever moving. We should adapt to. So on the next slide, I put what I think is the main idea behind what's the Privacy Sandbox initiatives overall. And the main idea is really to have the web browser becoming the gatekeeper of the user level data, I would say. And so they're one of the main principles that they put out is really that how can the browser filter user level information and really share with the rest of the ecosystem aggregated information, meaning having not representations of the individual, but really representations of user groups or interest groups, as they've been called in a few proposals. And here I've named a couple of the proposals that have been shared by the Google Chrome team, so Flock on the left side and TotalDove on the right-hand side, which both, again, aim at having the browser not carrying a user-level identifier, but carrying an identifier of an interest group. And on the Flock side, this interest group is determined by the browser and by Google services, but would be able to leverage the entire user navigation history on the Chrome browser, and that's the Flock proposal. On the TotalDove proposal, the idea is really enabling the websites themselves to create their own taxonomies, their own interest groups, but based only on the user activity on their websites. So that's two proposals that they have set forth, but that, again, roll on the same logic of suppressing the individual level and hiding it in a way from websites and from web participants, and really like expressing something more akin to a user group, a cohort, or an interest group. However, there has been some willingness to get some user level information, because some of this is important, definitely in the mechanisms and in the way to engage users and offer these users engaging experiences. But here again, the idea is really like to hold every identifiable user information into the browser or onto the device. So on the browser, it's the Web ID proposal on the right-hand side of the slide here, which has been part of the Privacy Sandbox, not one of the original proposals, but one that has come a bit later. Whereas Apple was already making inroads in the same idea with this is-logged-in API that is not part of the Privacy Sandbox, but that relates on the same logic, which is to offer some way for the users to log in, but this login information not being shared with the website or the web service the user is logging into, and really retaining this information either on the device for Apple or on the browser for the Web ID proposals. And this is an idea that's very much in discussions right now. How do we allow the users to authenticate in a way? And that's why we've seen quite a few proposals around developing single sign-on logics, such as the Ozone project, for instance, in the UK, and obviously the NetID Foundation solution that's very well known and very widespread in Germany. So again, the logic of this time having some user level information, but not tied to any user level identifier that would be portable, is really the logic behind the is-logged-in API and the Web ID proposals developed by Apple and Google. So a short recap, I guess in sum, there are a few things that we should carry away, we should have in mind when trying to devise solutions for the future. And Alex will let us know how the Tech Lab is thinking about those. But I think trends that we have to count on in the near future is that first, there will be an increasing fragmentation of logics, right, between the technical environments and the legal environments that we will all operate within. Meaning there will not be a one-size-fits-all solution. There will not be a one-size technical solution that will work everywhere and fine for everyone. So definitely having a deeper bench of solutions and having more agility in crafting the right solutions tailored to the needs of the client will be extremely important in the future. The second aspect is that since we are talking about regulatory shifts or technological shifts, these will be on-off kind of situations, right? It's not a gradual change that we can slowly adapt to. I think it's what we are about to face are really like tectonic shifts in a way, with a before and an after. And that will force everybody to be very clear on like what is their distinctive value they bring, because since the game will keep being reshuffled in a way, one will have to be very focused on its core value add to make sure that this is what he will carry through in the various settings that he or she will have to operate. So that's the second point. The third point is that there will be something that we'll have to live with, is really lack of visibility and transparency in some matter, right? About performance and controls, because without having individual level counters, I would say it's very hard to have individual level frequency caps, for instance, or to do budget management or measure reach precisely. So definitely one of the questions that we are facing these days is like, how do we cater to the needs for visibility, transparency, and even brand safety, right? Or brand experience to advertisers, for instance, but also publishers that also want to make sure that they are offering a pleasant experience on their websites in a world where there is much less visibility at the level where it is very important to have such visibility these days. And the last question, which I think is more transversal, but that's and probably more subject to wider discussions, is the main question about who is the first party in the relationship between a user and a service. And I think that's probably the critical questions that all the proposals are in the privacy sandbox are a bit dancing around, and even at Apple as well, because for everything that is said about first-party data is the new gold. I guess, or I mean, it's quite explicit actually that in a device manufacturer's viewpoint, the first party is actually the device, whereas when you're a browser manufacturer, it seems that the line of thought is that the browser is first party, and there is much to be said between the actual relationship between the service provider and the service consumer, meaning the user, which tend to be underrepresented in those forums that sometimes can be very technical and very technically focused, and which is why I think I would encourage everyone to participate. And I think one of such forums that where the future of our advertising industry is being defined is really the ADTECH lab and the REARC effort that Alex is working on. And Alex, if that's fine with you, I'd love for you to give us a little bit of more context and more details about where you're at.
Of course. So hi everybody, Alex Cohn from ADTECH lab, and I work on the product team, and as Charles-Henri said, focused on privacy and data protection efforts in general, and specifically spending a lot of time on Project REARC, where we've got a couple working groups going. So I'm going to give you a little update on that. Let's start in the first slide with sort of the key takeaways of this little brief introduction before the panel. So as Charles-Henri mentioned, right, like the focus here, not just for panels, right, for companies across the board that are trying to navigate disruption, is really around identifiers that can be used by third parties that support a range of use cases today. Charles-Henri mentioned frequency capping, recency control, attribution and measurement, and also creation of segments. All of those things today rely on identifiers that are being disrupted in some way, shape, or form. So as we spent a good amount of time just now on the browser, which is where some really tectonic shifts are taking place, but we've also got changes on mobile devices and sort of a landscape that's very fragmented on CTV. So we're focused on, with REARC, we're focused on that broad range of channels and really that identity disruption. Part of what's driving us is that we believe from a standards perspective that any sort of short-term workarounds only fuel the narrative that, advertising technology is bad. And that doesn't have to be the case, but we need to move away from sort of these short-term focused workarounds and that exacerbate the problem. And the rest is really like, well, what do we do then? So we need to think about re-architecting to preserve addressability, but in a privacy and data protection preserving way as well. So that's what we're heads down focused on. I'm going to give you a really quick run through of like what's the status on that, because I know there's a lot of groups to attend and it sometimes can be very confusing. So we'll just walk through to high level really quick. The process stage that we're at so far is we've gotten to a good shared understanding of the problem space, of the mission of the group, and now we're evaluating technical alternatives and design. So if you go to the next slide, those technical designs and alternatives really fall into two main buckets and two main working groups. There's an addressability working group that's thinking about what, how do we carry on those use cases that are critical to advertisers, publishers, and everything in between, right? To fund ad-supported content. And that group has sort of two tracks within it, thinking about the anonymous web of, or anonymous sort of devices and sort of context, like Charles-Henri was starting to describe, I think, and the panel will discuss even more. And then also authenticated context, which also Charles-Henri mentioned with things like NetID and Ozone Project. So that group is thinking about standards there. And then there's a accountability working group that is thinking about how to technically demonstrate fidelity and conformity to any user sort of transparency and control. So if you go to the next slide, actually keep moving forward really quick in addressability, authenticated consumer standards. Like, it's really about how do we make sure that there is a responsible way to do sort of login authenticated based advertising connections between sort of the publisher side of the equation and the advertiser side of the equation. So that's what we're focused on there. If you go to the next slide, in the anonymous sort of web, there's two tracks of both contextual and audience-based sort of taxonomies that we're working to build out to add to OpenRTB where there aren't user level IDs either at all for the purely anonymous cases, or in the next slide where the user's only known really to the publisher. That's really the breadth of this authenticated case, and then the fully anonymous and then only known to publisher. That's what the addressability working group is working on designs for right now, and has made it so far as to get to a stage where even a large entity like Prebid is looking at helping take some of these standards to market, which is really exciting because that's how we get scale. All right, so next slide. On the accountability front, let's build out like two more here because I want to give time for this really great panel. We've really got four areas that we're looking at on the accountability side, and it all starts with consumer. Yeah, the one you're on is great. That says Global Privacy Framework. So for the consumer, yeah, keep moving forward. Sorry. Yeah, there you go. For the consumer, it's critical. As Charles-Henri mentioned, the EU really led here, but the rest of the world is following now. And it's the right thing to do to provide transparency and control to users. So what we're doing is actually trying to build out the technical infrastructure to cross more of the globe for privacy signaling. So that's one track of accountability. The second track, if you'll go to the second slide, is really about creating an accountability program to that transparency and control, and designing the guidelines for what that means. And basically where the consensus is moving is that really a technical accountability program should really be what determines whether or not entities do participate in some of these like standardized authenticated systems, but also potentially even other non-auth ID-based solutions. We really want to make sure that there's accountability to those identifiers and the uses thereof. So the last two bits here, if you'll go to the next slide, are really creating the technical hooks to make it possible for us to go beyond just saying, hey, we're taking in signals and trust us. It's more about opening up the hood and saying, okay, what are we actually doing with the data? So we're designing sort of technical auditable data structures that on the last slide, you'll see, you know, we want to build an attestation framework around to basically like kind of test for anomalies in expected behavior and uses of data. And all of that work, that sounds like a whole lot. It is. All of that work is only possible because people get involved. And if you want to get involved in this discussion, you can head to iabtechlab.com/project REARC and learn more and sign up. It's not too late. We are in design stage, but we're getting into the nitty-gritty details now, and we need a lot of different cross-functional eyes on it. So I'm really glad to hear from this group, sort of hands, feet on the ground, sort of perspectives from several different sort of functions. So I'll hand it back over to Charles-Henri.
Thank you very much, Alex. And yes, definitely echo your signal here to really like join the discussion. I think the more we are at providing a viewpoint, the better the solution will be. So really, really important. So without further ado, I'd love to to take it over to the panel right now and maybe start with like taking a step back, because we've all talked about like things are happening, and it's it's at the end of cookie, and it's something utterly bad, and definitely it's something that we know that will change the way things operate today. But what's your perspective, and what are maybe your expectations in a post-cookie environment? Things is happening, so what we should strive for, I guess, is the first question we should think about. And maybe JB, if you want to head us off with your perspective.
Unmute. Yes. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for IAB ADTECH to inviting me. So I would like to say it's quite a good news for the industry. And why I say that? Firstly, because the end of third-party cookie, I guess, was inevitable because of user privacy concern, regulators, and because of data and business strategy of big tech like Google, Facebook, or even Apple. Then it's becoming a necessity as there are more and more cookies per user who is multi-equipped today, a very and still low cookie matching rate between 25 and 50% in average. And we have more and more statistic bias in the report on frequency capping or measurement. So, for example, today we underestimate reach on target because of lack of accuracy regarding the cross-device and cross-browser environment. And on the other hand, we underestimate frequency capping and effectiveness in the contribution analysis of studies. So today there is an imbalance between the platforms that run on logged people-based environments and the publishers who are really dependent on a currency that is less and less relevant. So big tech capture today in the most of the market 70% of the advertising market value and most of the growth, especially in France, it's the case since some years. So what we expect, to answer your question, we expect, of course, more accurate and cross-device identifiers to address the user in his consumer journey, whatever the environment, browsers or OS, or platforms or publisher, to engage better data-driven marketing strategy for the brands in a brand-safe and a brand-suitable context. So we are very supportive of IAB REARC project to make that privacy sandbox and universal ID initiative work both in the next generation framework.
Great perspective. I'd love to balance that with publisher perspective. I don't know if Gael, you're okay to give the other side of the other perspective, at least from the publisher perspective. Do you see it as much as an opportunity? And
yes, yes, Sharon, thank you. I think for publisher, it's not the end of all the cookies. It's the end of a period where every text could put a cookie on every website without any control. We are going into a new period where cookies will still be living, but the decision of having cookies will be mutualized between publisher and buy side. And I think it's very important for us. Publisher must organize the transition to first-party cookie. For example, which information they need to integrate, hard or soft signal. This will trigger more direct relations with the buy side, SSP, DSP, agency, or directly the brands. Will probably have a decrease of the open auction and an increase of deals. All of this will make a DMP and a data scientist even more mandatory. So I think in conclusion, it could be an interesting opportunity for publisher better control.
Okay, some good opportunities in there too, in having more equilibrium, or a more balanced, I would say, perspective or discussions. You mean with more personal relationship between demand side and publisher side. Super interesting. And Thibaut, what's your perspective representing the SIR data, the CMP, and the user, the first system the user interact with?
Yeah, well, I guess we could have different sort of expectations, depending if we stay with the status quo or if we manage to build an advertising future that reaches sort of global consensus somehow. If we stay with the status quo in the current debate at W3C, for instance, I guess we're not heading towards a more predictable, simplest, or even safer environment for the industry and ultimately for the end users. I mean, the web ecosystem would be more fragmented, and furthermore than the fragmentation we have between different devices, but by adding a new layer of complexity with proprietary solution, which is nothing good when, for example, you look at Apple latest news with the App Store Commission or the iOS 14 release. And also because the deprecation of identifiers, I think it's not encouraging a fair competition and innovation, because the value of our industry has been built upon it. This will create an asymmetry between the ADTECH vendors who have a direct relationship with the users and able to build a huge data set with 100 user data points, and those who don't, which could lead in a higher risk of market concentration in the ADTECH space, involving potential consequences of, I would say, unfair terms and conditions for the publishers in selling their inventory and for the advertisers who try to address their web campaign. And also because privacy will still be a #1 concern. There is no difference from a privacy standpoint between a first and a third-party identifier. Privacy won't be predictable, but still out of sight and control. It cannot be handled in proprietary, non-transparent environments that do not even communicate between each other. But that being said, I would agree with Gael saying that it is also a unique opportunity to see for the industry to improve itself. I mean, the digital advertising industry failed in many ways, and we are facing years of failure. We have no more choices to evolve by giving more transparency and control to the users in terms of privacy, and there is no trade-off possible on that. Building standards that support user-friendly and educational interfaces for user privacy preferences, as it is about time to for the open web to build a trusted relationship with users. And last but not least, bring digital advertising furthermore in terms of accountability to provide a truly credible set of standards to rely on. And I guess that how the project REARC is aiming for. So this is great.
Thanks, Thibaut. I would like to piggyback and continue with you, if that's okay, because I think you oppose, in a way, like having independent players that might benefit in an outsized manner versus others more independent or maybe smaller scale, and like in a way preempt the market opportunity. What roles do you see standards should play, and how to to relate or to have standards that are by definition a one size fits all, or fits most at least, solution with the individual innovation that we want to see encouraged?
Well, it could seem casual things to say, but I think that the main role of standards is to create like a common language that enables interoperability between systems, and ultimately favors innovation and competition instead of mitigating it or killing it, like the Bluetooth or the Wi-Fi, for instance, for access the internet. It is about ensuring a level playing field for all, I think, by defining common rule set and structure upon which we are all able to rely on and operate as businesses. And it is also about providing support and facilitate businesses to operate by helping them to adapt to their environment. I mean, which is often changing, like ours, for instance. And I think that TCF is a good example of this in response of a new regulatory constraints. And finally, it is about finding the right balance between private commercial interest and common interest as an industry. And when it comes to make structuring changes, the interests of the most must prevail over the interests of a few, whatever big they are. That's how I think we should envision not only the web advertising standards, but also the web standards.
Super interesting. So, David, if I may turn it to you now. So I think Thibaut talked about like some tools that should become normalized or standardized to ensure a level playing field. What in your perspective would be the right areas of focus to build such tools to make sure that the playing field is indeed a level, and that we see a more balanced ecosystem that you described in the first question?
Yeah. So I guess I agree with what Thibaut said earlier, but I guess effectively that standards have to shape a framework where innovation and competition can take place and be developed. What we expect also to get more transparency on how the data is collected and built, and the way we obtain the user consent for the use of their data, of course. The frontier was very blurry regarding the cookie. It's very hard for an advertiser or media agency when you are talking with data provider and also with the platform to understand how the data is fresh, qualified, and the potential reach we can have. So it's a very important point we expect from these standards to be more transparent globally, including on the where the data is built. Then we identify a commercial challenge, so it's maybe not the topic for standards to address this kind of deal, but there is really a challenge, and we will pay close attention to a fair balance and value share between platforms and open web. So today, for example, deterministic cross-device log data from Facebook or Google are completely free of charge. So regarding their reach on population all over the world and the one-stop shop they offer for easily activate campaigns, there is a competitive advantage for them compared to open ADTECH solutions. So business models are really different, and we need to be able to measure the added value of each layer. And regarding the cost of the data and the competitive distortion, I don't have the answer yet today, but for sure we need that these new standards facilitate open innovation and ability to have a comprehensive view of the offer from the different initiative around this identity and standards.
So probably something around measurement, yeah, to be standardized to make sure that numbers are comparable and talk to each other. And Gael, what would be your perspective on the role of standards and the balance between standards and innovation?
Yes, I think inventory will be split in three parts. On top, log on first party cookie. On mid-level, cohort as Google called it, or contextual. On bottom, consentless. Okay, and for each one, we will need to review standards on measurement. For the bottom part, consentless, when we don't have any consent, the French law, the CNIL, said no consent, no measurement. So the digital market will have a growth of non-personalized ads, and we are not sure how we will measure it and commercialize it. So I think it's a part important of the question. And the standard must answer this question. At the mid-level, we have some users with consent, but without an ID. So publishers will try to sell directly with their own segment of data or contextual. But in the other side, Google wants to work with cohorts on these inventories with probabilistic tools. So I think it will be also an important answer to know how Google will do it and how we can measure it. And for the top, it's when you have logged users or other identifications first party, you will need measurements like sync rate to be sure that all the digital ecosystem receives this data. But for this last part, for the top, the log user, we must all be careful about this. Most of the publisher will only have 10 or 20% of logged users. So we can't focus only on this 10 or 20%, but we must think about all the others.
Yeah, and probably if I may add, I think because that was one of the questions that was raised already, is that how do we adapt to measurement, cross-device measurement? I think one fundamental shift is that multi-touch attribution or any touch-based attribution is definitely being challenged. So either we compensate with some statistical modeling or we orient towards more robust methods, such as I think of incrementality-based. I think will definitely be one of the topics for work in the coming months. So, but before having to jump off already, I want to make sure we address the key questions here, which is, so how do you guys get involved and prepared for what's coming? And maybe Gael, since you highlighted a bit your perspective here, do you want to follow up directly?
Yes, I think publisher must improve the customer journey, le parcours client. I listed 4 actions. Keep a high level of consent. It will be very hard because CMP are made to decline. If the question is, do you want to be tracked by ads? Every logical person wants to say no. So I think it's not the good question. The publisher must say that we can't let CMP to be the first communication with customers. It's important to explain why our business model needs ads and why ads are not like social networks. I think a lot of people have seen the movie on Netflix, and I think it's very important to split ads from publisher on social network. Conceptual, I think it's probably a good way to do this. The second action will to be increase log users. Okay, so for Prisma, we have Prisma Connect, and we already have 3 million of logged users. So I think it's very important for all the digital ecosystem to improve this section. improve your DMP and contextual to have a good use of all your segment data, and to be sure to be ready for first-party cookie. And finally, find a way to monetize the no-consent inventory.
Very clear. So maybe Thibault, since you're representing a CMP, what's your take on like how do you envision, how do you get prepared and involved in preparing this for this new context?
Well, basically we get prepared by doing and exploring a lot of things at the same time. First, we are participating in trade organization, like IAB France, Europe, Tech Lab, REARC, and even the W3C. Believe me, it requires a lot of resources as a small business. So I would like to make a call to all the wealthy businesses out there that are also concerned as any other digital business to do allocate resources and join us. I think it is urgent to develop as an industry an awareness of a common interest, which implies mostly to switch from a short-term to a long-term way of thinking to avoid the web tragedy of the commons. But we're also anticipating product evolutions to adapt to the future state. We're lucky to have a strong expertise in privacy by being both a CMP provider and a data controller operating in the advertising business. So we're initiating partner with most IDs, identity providers, to publish and monetize the inventory by integrating it directly to our CMP. And by the same time, allowing us to leverage our third-party agencies for both side and buy side. But we also, we do understand that most of the web traffic publisher and advertiser won't be able to do one-to-one personalization at the same time. So we have semantic technology to operate contextual targeting where there is no identifier or user consent to be able to do so. And last but not least, we're thinking out of the box to identify new business areas, investing in research and development to already push further our semantic capabilities and build probabilistic agencies, contextual models to adapt ourselves to any sort of advertising future.
Thank you so much. JB, maybe how do you help your clients as a media agency get prepared, and how you prepare yourself?
Yeah, so very quickly, of course, we have some folks and representative from Publicis Media and Epsilon, which is our data entity within the group, in the W3C and GitHub discussion forum with the REARC project, and Prime in the US also, which is very linked with IAB. And why that? Because first we need to understand the discussion and the big take, depending on the discussion from Criteo Sandbox and REARC project. The idea behind that is to translate technical discussion, but also strategy topics to our client advertiser and help them to build their next-gen data strategy. So we encourage them to test wording in their CMP, in the way they ask to their audiences, why they have to give their consent to address better, more accurate ads, services, or products. And we help them also to have the right stack, technical stack, and the good partnership with the publisher, especially to enrich their data base, because it's quite easy today to collect third-party cookie, but get some log people or to get some PI information from their user. From their client, it would be, I guess, easy, but when you are talking about intenders or potential client, it will be more difficult for them to collect this kind of information from them. Where the cookie is easy, you just have to put a third-party cookie or first-party cookie, and it's okay. So mainly translate the big stack of the discussion, prepare technologically, and test the CMP and to collect more data.
Thank you very much, JB, and thank you, everyone. I think what's been very striking to me in these discussions is that with having the technical landscape so complex and the regulatory landscape complex, it seems to boil down to us working together and maybe crafting solutions together, testing together. And so yes, it's a collaborative effort, and collaborations require investment and time and energy, but it seems like it's the way forward for us to navigate together through these changes that are happening and impacting us all anyways. Thank you very much for the discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And looking forward to pursuing the discussion soon. Bye-bye.